The Mafia boss found the black maid singing in the dark to calm his son and couldn't explain why it broke him. Jasmine Carter sat quietly in the darkened nursery, her hands gently rocking the baby crib. Marco Romano, the son of the infamous Mafia boss Dominic Romano, had been crying for hours, his tiny body trembling in distress. Jasmine, a woman who had grown up with little, learned early on how to be resourceful and patient, but tonight, nothing had worked to calm the baby. She wasn't supposed to be in this room. It was against the rules. But when she saw the infant's tears, her heart broke. Jasmine knew that nothing she had tried so far was helping. The nursery, with its golden accents and luxurious details, felt foreign to her. She wasn't used to being surrounded by so much wealth and power. As a maid, she had learned to be invisible, to blend into the background and serve quietly, keeping her head down and doing her job. But tonight was different. The cries of Marco filled the air, and something inside Jasmine stirred. She sat beside the crib, trying to soothe him, but nothing seemed to work. Her mind raced, her body tense with frustration. Then, without thinking, she began to sing. It wasn't a song she had practiced, but one that had come from deep inside her. A lullaby her grandmother used to sing to her when she was a child, a tune that brought comfort in the darkest of times. As the soft, melodic notes filled the room, Marco's sobs began to quiet. Slowly, his body relaxed, his tiny hands uncurling from fists to soft, open palms. Jasmine kept singing, the words flowing out of her as if they had always been there. The nursery, once so cold and imposing, now felt warm and safe. Jasmine continued to sing, her voice trembling with emotion, as she gently rocked the crib. She didn't notice Dominic Romano standing in the doorway, his eyes locked on her. He had been passing by when he heard the faint sound of a lullaby drifting through the halls. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but when he stopped to listen, he realized it was coming from the nursery. He stepped forward, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. Jasmine didn't hear him at first. She was too lost in the rhythm of the song, the soft sounds that seemed to carry away all the pain and fear in the room. When she finally stopped singing, she looked up to find Dominic standing there, his gaze fixed on her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Dominic's usual icy composure seemed to falter for the first time. He had seen many things in his life, but this moment, this quiet act of tenderness, was unexpected. It was not what he was used to. He wasn't sure what it was, but something inside him shifted. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. What were you singing? His voice was rough, low, as if he wasn't sure how to ask the question. Jasmine hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the question. She had been so focused on the baby that she hadn't expected him to be watching. A lullaby, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It's something my grandmother used to sing to me when I was little. It calms the soul. Dominic stared at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he processed what she had just said. His usual cold demeanor seemed to crack, just for a second, before he regained control. He looked at Marco, who was now peacefully asleep in the crib, and then back at Jasmine. You have a gift, he said quietly, his voice still soft. Jasmine didn't know how to respond. She had always been invisible to people like Dominic, never expecting any recognition for the things she did. She had always been just a maid. But something in his words made her feel seen. For the first time in a long time, someone was acknowledging her, not just as a servant, but as a person. Dominic took a step closer to her, his eyes still fixed on Marco. Thank you, he said, his voice still uncharacteristically gentle. You've helped him. I didn't think anyone could. Jasmine felt her heart race at the unexpected words. She had only done what felt right, what any caring person would do. But hearing him say it, hearing him thank her, made her feel as if she had done something extraordinary. In that moment, she knew that this night would change everything. Jasmine stood there for a moment, her heart racing, still trying to process what had just happened. Dominic had never spoken to her like this before. His usual cold, authoritative demeanor had cracked, revealing a hint of something different, something softer, almost vulnerable. She didn't know how to respond. She had always been the quiet, invisible servant, the one who did her job without drawing attention to herself. But now, With Dominic's words hanging in the air, she felt as though she was being seen for the first time. She looked down at Marco, now peacefully asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. His once restless cries had been silenced by her song. It felt like a small victory, one she hadn't expected. Dominic watched her, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. It was not the cold, calculating look he usually wore, but something warmer, more human. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "I didn't know anyone could calm him like that," Dominic finally said, his voice low and quiet. "Thank you." Jasmine swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. She had done it without thinking, simply trying to comfort the baby in his time of need. But hearing him thank her, really thank her, stirred something inside her. "It was nothing," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anyone would have done the same." Dominic stepped closer, his eyes still locked on her. "No, not everyone would have," he said softly. "You have something rare. A kind of compassion that most people don't have." Jasmine felt her face flush, but she kept her gaze on Marco, not daring to meet Dominic's eyes. She didn't want to make this moment any more awkward than it already was. "I just wanted to help," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Dominic nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "You did," he said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. Jasmine could feel the weight of Dominic's presence, his power and authority. He was the Mafia boss, the one who controlled everything. Yet, in this small nursery, he seemed different. He seemed human. "You're not just a maid, are you?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say that. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously, her heart racing in her chest. Dominic took a step back, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he spoke again. "You've shown me something I didn't expect," he said quietly. "You've shown me that there's more to you than just being a servant." Jasmine didn't know how to respond. She had spent so long hiding behind her role as a maid, pretending that her worth came from doing her job well. But now, standing in front of Dominic, she felt a strange sense of uncertainty. Was there more to her than just that? Was there something else that could define her? "I'm just doing my job," she said, almost to herself. "That's all I know." Dominic studied her for a moment, as if considering her words. "You're not just doing your job, Jasmine," he said slowly. "You're doing something more. You're showing a side of yourself that no one else has seen. And that's something I can respect." Jasmine's heart fluttered in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She had always been careful not to show too much of herself, not to reveal any weakness. But now, standing here with Dominic, she felt as if she were being pulled in a direction she didn't fully understand. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," Dominic continued, his voice softer now. "You don't have to hide behind your job, behind the role you've been given. You have the right to be seen, Jasmine." Jasmine swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to say something, to thank him for his words, but all she could do was nod. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew that something was changing in her, something she had never expected. Dominic took a step back, his usual calm composure returning. "I'll leave you to rest," he said. "But know this, Jasmine. You've earned my respect today, and that's not something I give out easily." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Jasmine standing there, still processing his words. She stood there for a long time, the soft light from the nursery lamp casting a warm glow on her face as she watched Marco sleep. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before: hope. Jasmine Carter had never been one to seek attention. She had spent most of her life in the background, quietly going about her work. But as the days passed after her moment with Dominic Romano, something inside her shifted. She couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened in that nursery meant more than just calming a crying child. Dominic's words kept echoing in her mind. "You've earned my respect." He had said it so simply, yet it had meant so much. It wasn't just gratitude for her actions with Marco. No, it was something deeper. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Being seen, truly seen, felt like an impossible dream she'd never dared to hope for. Over the next few days, things felt different at the Romano estate. Jasmine carried out her usual duties, but the usual sense of invisibility that had been her shield for so long no longer felt as comforting. Every time Dominic passed by, there was a subtle shift in the air. His gaze lingered a moment longer than before, his expression unreadable, but there was a softness to it now, a quiet recognition. Jasmine wasn't sure how to react. She had always kept her distance, always kept her emotions hidden. But now, something inside her made her want to stand taller, to take up more space in the world. One afternoon, while she was polishing the grand staircase, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't need to look up to know it was Dominic. His presence was always unmistakable. She finished the step she was on, then stood still as he reached her. He didn't say anything at first. There was a long pause before he spoke, and his voice was softer than usual. "How are you, Jasmine?" It was a simple question, but it caught her off guard. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time in days. I'm fine, sir." Her voice sounded distant, even to her own ears. Dominic's gaze softened, and he took a step closer. "You don't have to call me sir. Not anymore." Jasmine blinked, her heart skipping a beat. She had been so used to calling him sir, so conditioned by years of serving powerful men like him. But something about his words, the way he said them, made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something new. She nodded, unsure of what else to say. Dominic looked at her for a long moment before speaking again, his voice quieter this time. "I've been thinking about what you did for Marco." He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor for a brief second before returning to hers. "I didn't realize how much he needed someone like you." Jasmine's chest tightened. The idea that she had done something for Marco, something that mattered to Dominic, was still hard to comprehend. "It's just what anyone would have done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're wrong," Dominic said, his tone gentle but firm. "Not everyone would have done that. What you did wasn't just about calming him. It was about something deeper, something most people wouldn't even understand." Jasmine didn't know how to respond to that. She felt a mix of emotions, pride, uncertainty, confusion. She had always believed that what she did, the work she did, was just a job. But now, Dominic was telling her something different. He was telling her that it mattered. She didn't know how to wrap her head around it. But for the first time, she felt like she mattered too. A few days later, Jasmine was cleaning the kitchen when she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his arms crossed, watching her with that same unreadable expression. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Of course, sir," Jasmine replied automatically. She still hadn't gotten used to the idea of calling him by his first name. Dominic nodded slightly. "It's about your position here. I've been thinking about it." Jasmine felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. She had worked here for months, doing her job as a maid, never questioning her place. But now, with Dominic standing there, something felt different. She had been expecting him to tell her to keep doing what she always did, to stay in the background. But when he spoke again, his words surprised her. "I want to offer you a new role. Something more than just being a maid." Jasmine's eyes widened in surprise. "A new role?" she echoed. Dominic's gaze softened, and he stepped into the room, his voice calm and steady. "I want you to stay here and help with Marco. He needs someone who can truly understand him, someone who can give him the care and attention he deserves. You've already shown that you have that ability." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about her job anymore. This was about being part of something, being needed. For the first time in her life, someone was asking her to stay, to be part of something bigger. She didn't know what to say. She had never imagined herself in a position like this. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Dominic gave her a small, understanding smile. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just think about it. You're more than just a maid, Jasmine. You're someone who can make a difference." The words hung in the air between them, and Jasmine felt something shift inside her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had a choice. A choice that was hers to make. Jasmine stood in front of the grand mirror in the hallway, staring at her reflection. The soft glow of the morning light filtered through the large windows, casting a warm hue on her face. She looked different somehow, but she couldn't put her finger on why. The offer Dominic had made her lingered in her mind, and it seemed surreal. To think that just a few days ago, she had been nothing more than an invisible maid in the house of one of the most powerful men in the city. Now, Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss, wanted her to stay and help care for his son Marco. It felt like a dream, one that she wasn't sure she deserved to wake up from. As she ran her fingers through her hair, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. She didn't need to look up to know it was Dominic. His presence was always unmistakable, even when she tried to ignore it. She had learned to remain invisible, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But now, everything felt different. The past few days had been filled with moments of uncertainty, of trying to understand the unexpected kindness Dominic had shown her. He had always been a man of control, of power, but the way he spoke to her, the way he looked at her, was something she had never expected. Dominic's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Jasmine, can I speak with you for a moment?" She turned to face him, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. His usual cold demeanor seemed to be replaced by something softer, something more personal. "Of course, sir," she replied, her voice steady but tinged with nerves. Dominic gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile before stepping closer. "Please, Jasmine, no need for formalities," he said, his tone gentle. "You're not just a maid here. Not anymore." Jasmine swallowed, unsure of what to say. She had always respected him, kept her distance, and now, hearing him say those words made her feel both small and important at the same time. Dominic continued, his gaze soft but firm. "I meant what I said the other day. You've earned my respect. I want you to stay here and help with Marco. I'm not asking this of you out of obligation, but because I believe you can help him. And frankly, I believe you deserve more than what you've been given." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat, and she fought to keep her composure. She had never been one to ask for anything. She had always worked hard to survive, to make ends meet, but now, Dominic was offering her something she had never dreamed of. "I don't know what to say," she admitted softly, her voice betraying her confusion. "This is all so new to me." Dominic stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. "You don't have to say anything right now, but I want you to know that I trust you, Jasmine. I trust you with Marco, and I trust you with this family." Jasmine's heart fluttered in her chest. The idea that she was being trusted with something so important, something so precious, felt overwhelming. She had never imagined that she could be more than just a maid, just someone who cleaned and served in the shadows. But now, she was being offered a chance to make a real difference, to be someone who was seen, valued, and respected. "I'll think about it," Jasmine said, her voice quiet but sincere. Dominic nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But know that the offer stands. You're more than capable, Jasmine. Don't doubt that." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Jasmine standing there in the hallway, her mind racing. She didn't know what to do, didn't know what her next step should be. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a choice that could change everything. As the days passed, Jasmine found herself thinking about Dominic's offer more and more. She spent her time with Marco, helping him with his routines, comforting him when he was upset, and finding herself growing closer to the little boy. He had become a part of her life, and she couldn't ignore the bond that was forming between them. But it wasn't just about Marco. It was about her too. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was more than just a background character in someone else's world. She felt like she had a purpose, a role that mattered. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who could make a difference, someone who could be valued and respected. One evening, as she sat with Marco in the nursery, watching him play with his toys, Jasmine found herself lost in thought. She thought about her life, about how far she had come, and about the possibility of a future where she was more than just a servant. She thought about Dominic, about his kindness, and the way he had treated her with respect and dignity. It was a side of him she had never seen before, and it left her questioning everything she had believed about herself. Could she really take the next step? Could she accept Dominic's offer and become a part of this world, a world that had always seemed so far beyond her reach? As she gazed at Marco, a small smile on her face, she made a decision. She was going to do it. She was going to stay. She was going to accept Dominic's offer and step into a new chapter of her life. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. She had always been strong, always pushed through the toughest times, and now, she was going to embrace this opportunity. Jasmine stood up, holding Marco in her arms, and walked to the door. As she stepped into the hallway, she felt a sense of purpose wash over her. She was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed Jasmine's decision were filled with a sense of quiet anticipation. It was as if everything in the house had shifted, but in a subtle way. She went about her daily duties with a renewed sense of purpose, her steps a little lighter, her heart a little fuller. Dominic had been true to his word. He had given her more responsibility, asking her to help with Marco more frequently, and each day brought new challenges and rewards. But it was not just the work that was different. It was how she felt when she looked around the Romano estate. She no longer felt like an outsider, a mere servant. The staff, too, seemed to regard her differently now. There was still the usual hierarchy, of course, but there was an unspoken understanding, a shift in how they viewed her. She was no longer just the maid. Jasmine had become something more. Dominic had kept his distance for the most part, but there were moments when their paths crossed, moments that left her wondering about the man behind the power. He had trusted her with Marco, allowing her to spend time with the child, helping him with his routine, and even teaching him small things that made him smile. It was in these moments that Jasmine saw a side of Dominic that few ever did, a side that was not so cold, not so distant. There were nights when she stayed in the nursery a little longer than expected, helping Marco fall asleep. Dominic would appear at the door, watching them quietly, his expression unreadable. He never said much, but she could feel his gaze on her. It was as though he was observing, silently assessing her every move. She had grown used to it. It wasn't intimidating. In fact, it was oddly comforting. It was as if he trusted her, even if he didn't fully show it. One evening, after Marco had finally fallen asleep, Jasmine sat by the crib, gazing out the window at the city lights. It was late, and the house was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic. She had been sitting there for some time when she heard footsteps approaching. Without turning, she knew it was Dominic. He entered the room, his silhouette framed by the light from the hallway. "How is he?" he asked quietly, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Jasmine turned to face him, offering a small smile. "He's sleeping peacefully. He's had a long day." Dominic nodded, his eyes flickering to Marco before returning to her. There was a moment of silence, a pause that stretched longer than expected. Jasmine wondered what was going through his mind, what he was thinking as he stood there, watching her. It was moments like these that made her realize just how much she had come to depend on his presence, on the way he seemed to watch over her, even when he wasn't saying anything. "I never thank you properly," Dominic said after a while, his voice breaking the silence. Jasmine blinked, taken aback by the suddenness of his words. "For what?" she asked, her brow furrowing slightly. He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "For everything you've done for Marco. For being here. For being you." His words were simple, but they held weight, and Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest at the sincerity in his voice. "I'm just doing my job," she replied softly, her voice almost a whisper. "No," Dominic said firmly. "You're doing more than that. You're giving him something he's never had, someone who truly cares about him." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. The truth was, she did care about Marco. She cared deeply, but she had never expected that her feelings for him would be acknowledged in such a way. "You've made a difference," Dominic continued, his voice quieter now. "And I don't take that lightly." Jasmine looked down at Marco, her fingers gently brushing the soft fabric of his blanket. "I'm just trying to help," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I want to help him." Dominic watched her for a long moment, his expression softening. "I know," he said quietly, "and you're doing more than you realize." The silence returned, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was a silence that felt safe. For the first time in a long time, Jasmine didn't feel like she had to hide. She didn't feel like she had to be invisible. Dominic's words, his trust in her, had made her feel as though she had a place here, a purpose. And that was something she had never thought possible. As the evening drew to a close, Dominic gave her a nod and turned to leave. "Get some rest, Jasmine. You've earned it." Jasmine watched him go, her heart still racing, the weight of his words settling in. She knew that things were changing, that her life was taking a different turn. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own future. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. The days seemed to blur together as Jasmine settled into her new role. She had never imagined that her life would change in such a way, but here she was, standing at the threshold of something she hadn't even dared to dream of. With each passing day, she grew more attached to Marco. His small hand in hers, his smile when he saw her, his giggles as they played together. It was all so new, so foreign, yet so beautiful. Dominic had kept his word. He had given her more responsibility, asking her to be more involved with Marco's daily routine. She spent her days with him, feeding him, reading to him, helping him with his naps, and every day she found herself growing more attached. But it wasn't just Marco who had captured her heart. There was also Dominic, the man who had changed her life in ways she could never have predicted. He had always been a man of few words, but there was something in his eyes when he looked at her now, a softening, a recognition of the bond they shared. She had expected him to keep his distance, to remain the cold, calculating Mafia boss that everyone feared. But instead, he seemed different. When he spoke to her, it was as if he saw her as more than just a maid. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew it was something important. One evening, as she was walking through the grand hallway, she heard Dominic's voice calling her from the study. "Jasmine, can you come here for a moment?" His voice was steady, but there was an urgency to it that made her heart race. She quickly made her way to the study, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. When she entered the room, she found Dominic standing by the window, staring out into the night. The city lights shimmered below, but his attention seemed focused on something far beyond that. "Come in," he said, turning to face her. "I need to talk to you about something." Jasmine nodded and stepped into the room, her nerves buzzing with anticipation. She had no idea what this conversation would be about, but she had a feeling it was important. Dominic motioned for her to sit, and she did, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said slowly, "about everything that's been happening here." Jasmine felt her heart skip a beat. Was he questioning her decision to stay? Did he want her to leave? But before she could voice her concerns, Dominic continued. "You've been more than just a help with Marco," he said, his voice softening. "You've become a part of this family, a part of my life, whether you realize it or not." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat, and she struggled to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She had never imagined that she would feel this way, that someone, especially someone like Dominic, would see her as more than just a servant. I never expected this," she whispered, her voice shaky. Dominic's expression softened, and he stepped closer, sitting down beside her. "Neither did I," he admitted quietly. "But I'm not going to deny it. You've changed things for me, Jasmine. For Marco too. You've shown us what it means to truly care, to be there when it matters." Jasmine looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. She had never been good at accepting praise, but Dominic's words made her feel something she had never felt before, worthy. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done," Dominic continued, his voice gentle. "But I want you to know that you're not just here to help with Marco. You're here because I want you here. And I believe you deserve more than you've been given." Jasmine's heart swelled in her chest. She had always believed she was destined for nothing more than the role she had been assigned, cleaning, serving, blending into the background. But now, Dominic was offering her something more, something she had never thought possible. "I want you to stay with us," Dominic said, his gaze locking with hers. "You've earned your place here, Jasmine. Not just because of what you do, but because of who you are. And I want you to know that you're valued." The words felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a purpose, like she mattered. It wasn't just about the work she did, it was about who she had become. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Dominic nodded, his expression softening even further. "No thanks necessary," he said quietly. "You've already given me more than I could ever ask for." Jasmine didn't know what to say next. She had never expected this moment, never imagined that she would be sitting here, having this conversation with Dominic Romano. But she knew one thing for sure. Her life had changed, and it was because of the choices she had made. She had chosen to stay, to take the risk, and in doing so, she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. As she looked at Dominic, she saw a man who, despite his power, was capable of great kindness and understanding. And for the first time in her life, Jasmine felt like she had found a place where she truly belonged. The days following Dominic's words felt like a turning point for Jasmine. She moved through the house with a newfound sense of purpose, her steps more confident than they had ever been. For the first time in a long time, she felt as though she truly belonged, not just in the house, but in the life that Dominic had offered her a part in. Her role with Marco continued to deepen, and she found herself bonding with him in ways she hadn't expected. The little boy, who had once seemed so distant and fragile, now reached out to her, laughing when she played with him, reaching for her hand when he was scared, and curling up in her arms at bedtime. It was in these quiet moments, away from the prying eyes of the world, that Jasmine felt like she was truly making a difference. She no longer saw herself as just a maid or a caretaker. She saw herself as someone who was shaping Marco's world, someone who was helping him heal in his own way. The connection they shared felt more like family than anything else, and Jasmine cherished each moment of it. But it wasn't just Marco who had brought her this new sense of purpose. It was also Dominic. Though he remained somewhat distant, there were moments, small moments, that made her realize just how much he appreciated her. He would stop by the nursery to check on Marco, sometimes just standing at the door and watching them interact. Jasmine had grown accustomed to his presence, and now, there was an unspoken understanding between them. He trusted her. That was something she never thought she would have in this world. One afternoon, as she was playing with Marco in the garden, she saw Dominic approaching from across the yard. He was walking toward her with purpose, his usual composed demeanor softened by something she couldn't quite place. She stood up as he reached her, Marco still sitting on the grass, tugging at the blades. "How's he doing?" Dominic asked, his voice gentle, but filled with the same quiet authority she had come to recognize in him. "He's doing well," Jasmine replied, smiling as she looked down at Marco, who was now crawling toward a small butterfly that had landed nearby. "He's been getting stronger every day." Dominic nodded, his gaze lingering on Marco for a moment before he looked back at Jasmine. "I can see that. You've been good for him. For both of us." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Jasmine's chest tighten. She wasn't used to receiving praise, especially not from someone like Dominic. She had spent most of her life doing the work no one else wanted to do, staying invisible, staying out of the way. But now, here was Dominic, a man who controlled empires, telling her she had made a difference. It was almost too much to process. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. Dominic's expression softened, and he took a small step closer. "No, Jasmine," he said quietly, his voice serious. "You've done more than just help Marco. You've helped me too. I've been a little lost these past few years. Losing my wife, raising Marco alone, trying to keep everything together. But you've brought something into this house I didn't even realize we were missing." Jasmine's heart fluttered at his words, but she didn't know how to respond. She was still processing everything that had happened, everything that was happening between them. But in that moment, standing there in the garden, watching Marco play with the butterfly, she realized that things had changed, not just in the house, but in herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She was being seen, being valued. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just a shadow in someone else's world. She was a part of something real. "I'm glad I'm here," Jasmine said, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic looked at her, his eyes intense and filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. "I'm glad too," he said softly. The moment stretched between them, but before it could become too heavy, Marco let out a small giggle, breaking the tension. Jasmine turned to see him sitting on the grass, his little hands reaching for the butterfly as it flew away. She laughed softly, the sound light and carefree. Dominic smiled, watching her interact with Marco. "He's lucky to have you," he said quietly. "We both are." The words hung in the air, and Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never expected to be a part of something like this, something so real. But now, standing there with Dominic and Marco, she realized that she was. And for the first time, she didn't feel invisible anymore. She felt like she mattered. Jasmine had become accustomed to the quiet rhythm of the days that passed in the Romano estate, but each day brought with it something new, something she had never expected. She spent her mornings with Marco, playing with him in the garden or helping him with his favorite books. She had learned to read to him in a soft, soothing voice, and Marco would sit quietly, his little eyes focused intently on the pictures. There was something deeply fulfilling about those moments, something that made her feel more connected to the world than she had ever felt before. As much as she enjoyed her time with Marco, there were still moments when her mind drifted to Dominic. He was always there, in the background, watching, but ever since their conversation in the garden, there was a shift. She had seen a different side of him, a side that was softer, more open. It was clear that he trusted her, and that trust meant more to her than she could put into words. But Jasmine had always been careful not to cross boundaries. She had her place in this world, and she was determined to stay in it. Her role was simple. She was there for Marco, and that was enough. But as the days passed, she couldn't help but feel like the world around her was changing. The estate felt less like a place where she worked and more like a place where she belonged. One evening, after Marco had gone to bed, Jasmine found herself in the kitchen, making tea. The house was quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant rustling of the wind outside. As she stirred the tea, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his usual calm demeanor softened by the light of the kitchen. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said, his voice gentle. "You're not disturbing me," Jasmine replied, a small smile on her face. "I was just making some tea." Dominic nodded, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he stepped closer. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "for everything you've done, not just for Marco, but for me." Jasmine blinked in surprise, unsure of how to respond. "I haven't done anything special," she said, her voice soft. "I'm just doing my job." Dominic shook his head, his expression serious. "You've done more than just your job. You've brought something into this house that I didn't even realize we were missing." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She had never been good at accepting compliments, but there was something about Dominic's words that made her heart swell. She had always felt like she was just going through the motions, but now, she realized that what she was doing mattered. "I just want to help," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. Dominic smiled softly, a look of appreciation in his eyes. "You've done more than help, Jasmine. You've made a difference. In Marco's life, and in mine." The words hung in the air, and Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never expected this. Never expected that someone like Dominic would see her as more than just a maid, more than just a servant. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot to me." Dominic nodded, his expression softening. "I mean it," he said quietly. "You've given me something I didn't even know I needed." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled with an understanding that didn't need words. Finally, Dominic broke the silence, his voice quiet. "You've earned my trust, Jasmine, more than anyone else here." Jasmine felt a surge of emotion, but she kept her composure. She had always been the one who served in silence, the one who remained unnoticed. But now, with Dominic's words, she felt seen, heard, valued. "I won't let you down," she said softly. Dominic gave her a small smile. "I know you won't." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his words. "You're more than just a maid, Jasmine. I want you to remember that." Jasmine nodded, her heart racing. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had a place in it. A real place. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was someone who mattered, someone who had made a difference. As Dominic turned to leave the kitchen, Jasmine stood there for a moment, staring at the cup of tea in front of her. She didn't know what was happening between her and Dominic, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had changed. And for the first time, it felt like she was moving towards something greater than just surviving. She was living, truly living. As the weeks went by, Jasmine found herself settling into a new rhythm at the Romano estate. The house no longer felt as cold and distant as it once had. Every morning, she woke up to the sound of birds singing outside her window, a sound that seemed to bring peace to the otherwise quiet estate. Marco was growing more attached to her, and she to him. It was a bond that went beyond just caregiving. It was the kind of connection that made Jasmine feel like she was making a real difference. She spent her mornings with Marco, teaching him simple things, how to say his name, how to pick up his toys, and how to recognize colors. The laughter that filled the nursery each time he learned something new made her heart swell with pride. It was a joy she had never known before, a joy that made her realize just how much she had to give. In the afternoons, when Marco took his nap, Jasmine found herself with some rare moments of quiet. But even during these moments of solitude, she often thought about Dominic. He was always there, in the background, watching over everything. His presence was a constant, and Jasmine had grown used to the way he would sometimes stop by the nursery, checking in on Marco, offering a quiet word of thanks, or just observing the bond between her and the boy. He had been true to his word. He had trusted her, and that trust had begun to change everything for her. Dominic had always been a man of control, but Jasmine could see now that there was more to him than the cold, calculating exterior he had worn for so long. He had a heart that cared deeply for his son, and, despite his best efforts to deny it, for the people who mattered to him. She had begun to see him differently, too. Not just as the Mafia boss who ruled over everything, but as a man who had been hurt, who had suffered loss, and who was doing the best he could to protect the ones he loved. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Jasmine found herself starting to care about him in a way she hadn't expected. There were moments, brief but meaningful, when their paths would cross, when he would look at her, and for a split second, she would see something soft in his eyes, something that made her heart skip a beat. He didn't say much, but his actions spoke volumes. One evening, after Marco had fallen asleep, Jasmine was walking through the grand hall when she noticed Dominic standing at the window, staring out at the city below. He had been working in his study all day, and she hadn't seen much of him. But now he was standing there, his broad shoulders relaxed, a slight frown on his face as he looked out into the night. She hesitated for a moment, but then decided to approach him. "Everything all right?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. Dominic turned to face her, his expression unreadable for a moment. But when he saw her standing there, his features softened. "Just thinking," he replied quietly, his voice carrying a hint of something she couldn't quite place. "About what?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Dominic stepped away from the window and turned to face her fully. There was something different about him tonight, something more open, more vulnerable. "About you," he said, his voice low. Jasmine blinked, surprised by his words. "Me?" she repeated, unsure of how to process what he had just said. He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've changed things here, Jasmine," he said softly. "I've seen it. I've felt it." Jasmine's heart raced, but she remained still, unsure of how to respond. Dominic's eyes searched hers, as if trying to find the right words. "I never thought I'd find someone who could come in and make a difference like you have. Not just with Marco, but with me, too. You've made me see things in a different light." Jasmine didn't know what to say. She had never expected this kind of conversation, especially not with Dominic. She had always kept her distance, always told herself that she was just a maid, just someone who worked in the background. But now, standing here, hearing him speak like this, she felt like everything she had ever known was being turned upside down. "I didn't do anything special," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." Dominic shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "What you've done is special. What you've done is important. You've given me something I didn't even realize I needed." The weight of his words settled over her, and for the first time, Jasmine felt something shift within herself. She had always believed that she was invisible, that her worth came only from the work she did. But now, standing here with Dominic, she realized that she had more to offer than she had ever imagined. Dominic stepped closer to her, his presence filling the space between them. "You've earned my respect, Jasmine, and I want you to know that." His words lingered in the air, and Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the respect he had given her. It was the acknowledgement of who she truly was. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was someone who mattered. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "You've changed my life, Jasmine," he said quietly. "And I don't think I can go back to the way things were before." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't look away. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something beautiful, something she had never dared to dream of. The days that followed felt like a delicate dance between what had been and what could be. Jasmine moved through the estate with a quiet confidence, her every action reflecting the changes within herself. She had never expected to feel so at home in this place, a place that had once seemed so foreign, so filled with power and wealth. But now, as the days passed, she felt like she had become part of it, a part of something real, something more than just the life she had known before. Her connection with Marco continued to deepen. The little boy, whose laughter had once been so rare, now filled the house with joy every day. Jasmine had become more than just a caretaker to him. She was his anchor, his safe place. It wasn't just about the physical care anymore. It was about the emotional bond they shared. It was about the trust he placed in her, the comfort he found in her presence. And it was in those moments that Jasmine realized just how much she had come to love him. But it wasn't just Marco who had changed her life. It was Dominic. The man who had once seemed so distant, so wrapped up in his world of power and control, had become someone she never could have imagined. There were moments when they shared brief conversations, when their eyes met in silent understanding, and she felt something between them that was more than just the employer and employee dynamic that had once defined their relationship. In those moments, Jasmine saw a side of Dominic that few ever did, the side of him that cared deeply, that had been broken by loss but was slowly healing. It was a side that she had come to appreciate, a side that had made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. It was a quiet evening when the shift in their relationship became undeniable. Marco was already asleep, his small body curled up under the soft blankets in his nursery. The house was peaceful, the usual hum of activity replaced by a quiet stillness. Jasmine had been in the kitchen, preparing some tea for herself, when she heard Dominic's voice in the doorway. "Jasmine," he said softly, his voice carrying through the stillness. She turned to face him, her heart fluttering in her chest. "Yes?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dominic stepped into the room, his expression unreadable as he watched her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the room was palpable, but it was not uncomfortable. It was as if they were both waiting for something that neither of them had expected but both knew was coming. Finally, Dominic broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "About everything. About you. About Marco." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew that this conversation would change things. She waited, her hands clasped tightly together as she tried to steady her nerves. "You've been incredible with Marco," Dominic continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've never seen him respond to anyone like he has to you. You've brought him something he's never had before: love, care, and security." Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but she didn't know how to respond. She had never expected to hear such praise from him, especially not in such an open, vulnerable way. "It's just what he needs," Jasmine replied softly, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not about me. It's about him. He deserves someone who will be there for him." Dominic nodded, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "You've given him that," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "And you've given me something I never thought I needed." Jasmine looked at him, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Dominic took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "I've spent so much of my life thinking I had everything under control. But you've shown me what it means to truly care for someone, to give without expecting anything in return. You've shown me that there's more to life than just power, than just control." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Jasmine didn't know how to process what he had just said. She had always seen Dominic as someone who had it all, someone who was untouchable, unreachable. But now, standing here in front of him, she realized that he was just as human as anyone else. He had his own struggles, his own vulnerabilities, and it was through her that he had started to see things differently. "I don't know what to say," Jasmine whispered, her heart racing. "I never expected this, any of this." Dominic smiled softly, his eyes filled with a mixture of affection and understanding. "You don't have to say anything," he said quietly. "Just know that you've made a difference. In Marco's life. And in mine." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't put into words. She had never imagined that she could have this kind of impact, that she could change someone's life in such a meaningful way. But as she stood there, in the warmth of the kitchen, with Dominic standing in front of her, she realized that she had. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, valued, and, most of all, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The following days felt like a delicate balance of quiet moments and unspoken words. Jasmine had become so accustomed to the routines of life in the Romano estate, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted. It was not just about caring for Marco anymore, though that brought her immeasurable joy. It was about the quiet understanding that had formed between her and Dominic. He trusted her in ways she never imagined possible. She had grown to admire him, not just for his power, but for the vulnerability he had allowed her to see. Dominic had always been a man of control. He had built an empire, commanded respect, and ruled with an iron fist. But somewhere between the quiet moments they shared, when he would linger in the nursery, observing Marco and Jasmine, or when he would pause to speak with her, she saw the man beneath the facade. He was complex, scarred, and in some ways, still healing. Jasmine often found herself lost in thought when she wasn't with Marco, reflecting on what had happened in her life since she had come to work for the Romano family. There were moments when she couldn't believe how much had changed. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who mattered. And Dominic? Well, Dominic had become more than just a man of power to her. There were times when their conversations lingered, longer than usual, when their eyes met with a depth of understanding that neither of them could easily explain. Jasmine had always been the one to stay out of the spotlight, to blend into the background, and to keep her emotions hidden. But with Dominic, something was different. She wasn't sure when it had started, but the connection between them was undeniable. It wasn't romantic, at least not in the way she had once imagined love to be. It was something quieter, something built on respect, shared understanding, and mutual care for Marco. One evening, after Marco had gone to sleep, Jasmine found herself walking through the garden, a slight breeze brushing against her skin. It was a rare moment of solitude, a time when the estate felt calm and still. She paused near the fountain, watching the water glisten in the moonlight, her mind wandering as she thought about all the changes in her life. She wasn't sure what she had expected when she first arrived at the Romano estate, but it wasn't this. She never expected to feel like she had a place here, to feel seen, and certainly not to be trusted with the care of Dominic's son. As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to find Dominic walking toward her, his figure illuminated by the soft glow of the garden lights. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy with the unspoken bond they shared. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Dominic said softly, his voice low. Jasmine smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You're not disturbing me," she replied, her heart fluttering in her chest. There was something different about the way he looked at her now. It was a look of appreciation, of understanding, and something else that she couldn't quite define. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he continued, his voice more serious now. Jasmine looked at him curiously, wondering what this conversation would bring. "About what?" she asked gently, her breath catching in her throat. Dominic paused, his gaze shifting to the stars above them before meeting her eyes again. "About you," he said, his words weighing heavily on the air. "I've seen how much you've done for Marco, for this family, and I can't help but feel that I owe you more than just thanks." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected Dominic to speak so openly, especially about her. She had always been content with her role, never expecting any kind of recognition for the work she did. But now, hearing him say these words, she felt something stir inside her. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just doing what I can." Dominic stepped closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "You've done more than that," he said, his tone softer now. "You've given me peace. You've given Marco the stability he needed, and you've brought something into this house that we both needed, hope." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment, Jasmine didn't know what to say. She had never expected to be the one to bring hope into anyone's life, let alone Dominic's. "I never imagined it would be like this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When I first came here, I thought it would just be another job. I didn't think I'd become part of this family." Dominic smiled faintly, his gaze softening. "You are part of this family," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "And I want you to know that. You're not just a maid anymore, Jasmine. You're someone who has made a real difference." Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had never allowed herself to believe that she could be more than just the work she did. But here, in the quiet of the garden, with Dominic standing before her, she realized that she was. She was more than just a maid. She was someone who had become indispensable, someone who mattered. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." Dominic looked at her for a moment longer before speaking again, his voice gentle. "I don't know what the future holds, Jasmine, but I do know one thing. We're in this together. All of us." For the first time, Jasmine didn't feel uncertain about her place in the world. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And with that thought, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it. The days after Dominic's words felt like a shift in the air. Jasmine had always been careful not to let herself dream too big, not to hope for too much, but now, something had changed. It wasn't just the routine or the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was helping Marco. It was everything. The connection she had with him, the unspoken trust that had grown between her and Dominic, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was meant to be here. She moved through the estate with a different kind of ease now. Her days were filled with laughter and play with Marco, and the evenings brought a quiet peace she had never known. She felt valued in a way she had never expected, not just for the work she did, but for who she was. She had a place here, and it felt like she was finally part of something important. One evening, after dinner, Jasmine found herself walking through the gardens, the crisp night air brushing against her skin. The estate was bathed in soft moonlight, and for a moment, she stood still, taking in the quiet beauty of it all. It was a rare moment for her, a time when she could simply be herself, away from the demands of the day. She had always been the type to keep her feelings to herself, to remain in the background, but now, standing in the garden, she allowed herself to think about everything. She thought about Dominic and the changes she had seen in him. He was still the man of power, the one who commanded respect, but there was something different now. He was more than just the Mafia boss. He was someone who had allowed her into his world, someone who had trusted her. And that trust had made all the difference. She didn't know what to make of it, but she knew that her feelings for him were changing. It wasn't love, not yet, anyway, but it was something deep, something that went beyond the boundaries of employer and employee. She had come to care for him in ways she hadn't anticipated, and the more time she spent with him, the more she realized that they understood each other in a way no one else did. Dominic had been through so much, loss, pain, betrayal, and yet, he had allowed her to see the parts of him that he kept hidden from the world. She hadn't asked for it, but somehow, it felt natural. She didn't have to say anything. She didn't have to try. It was just there, in the quiet moments they shared, in the way he looked at her, in the way they didn't need words to understand each other. She was drawn to him, to the man behind the power, to the person who cared more than he let on. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Dominic walking toward her, his face illuminated by the soft light of the garden. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. Jasmine smiled and stepped aside, gesturing to the empty space beside her. "Of course," she replied. They stood together in silence for a moment, looking out over the garden. The air was cool, and the night seemed to hold a certain stillness, as if the world had paused just for them. Finally, Dominic spoke, his voice quiet. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, his tone thoughtful. "About everything." Jasmine turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic hesitated for a moment, then looked at her with a seriousness that made her stomach flutter. "About you," he said simply. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what he meant, but the way he said it, the way he looked at her, made her feel like the world had shifted again. "About me?" she repeated, her voice soft with disbelief. Dominic nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "You've done more than just take care of Marco. You've shown me a side of life I've forgotten about. You've reminded me of things I've pushed away." Jasmine was silent, unsure of how to respond. She had never expected Dominic to open up to her like this, never expected him to see her as more than just a caretaker for his son. "I don't know if I've done anything special," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." Dominic's eyes softened as he stepped closer to her. "No," he said firmly. "You've done more than that. You've made a difference in ways I can't even explain. You've shown me that there's more to life than power and control, more than just the things I've spent my life building." Jasmine felt her chest tighten at his words, but she didn't know how to respond. She had never allowed herself to believe that she could make such a difference, especially not in the life of someone like Dominic. "I didn't expect this," Dominic continued, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I didn't expect you to come into our lives and change everything. But you have." Jasmine swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears at bay. "I never meant to change anything," she said softly. "I just wanted to help. I just wanted to do what was right for Marco. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his eyes intense. And you have, he said, his voice filled with conviction. You've done more than that. You've shown me that it's okay to care again, to let people in. Jasmine's heart raced at his words. She wasn't sure what this meant, but she knew it was something important. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke, it felt like something was shifting between them. I didn't expect to feel this way, Dominic said softly. I didn't expect to care this much. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him. You don't have to say anything, she whispered. I understand. Dominic smiled faintly, his expression softening. No, he said gently, you don't understand. You're not just part of Marco's life anymore. You're part of mine. The words hung in the air, and Jasmine felt the weight of them settle in her chest. She had never imagined that something like this could happen, that she could become so important to someone like Dominic. But now, as she stood there with him in the garden, she realized that everything had changed. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. She mattered. The days turned into weeks, and the quiet changes in the Romano estate continued to unfold. Jasmine had grown more comfortable in her role, but it was no longer just about taking care of Marco. It had become something deeper, something more personal. She had found herself wrapped up in a world she never thought she would be a part of, but now, it felt like her own. Dominic, the man who had once been a figure of mystery and power, had become more to her than just an employer. They had developed a connection that went beyond the walls of the estate, something that neither of them had expected. There were still moments when Dominic would surprise her, when he would look at her with a depth of understanding, or when he would say something small that made her realize just how much he valued her. It wasn't just the care she gave to Marco. It was who she was, what she had become in his eyes. It wasn't always easy, though. Jasmine had spent her life keeping her distance from people, hiding her emotions, and staying in the background. But with Dominic, that was becoming harder to do. She found herself thinking about him more often, wondering what he was doing, what he was feeling, even when they weren't speaking. He had a way of making her feel seen, of making her feel like she mattered. One afternoon, after Marco had taken his nap and was playing in the garden, Jasmine found herself alone in the living room, sitting by the window. The estate was quiet, the sun casting a warm glow across the room, but her mind was far from peaceful. She couldn't stop thinking about Dominic. She had spent so much of her life keeping things simple, never allowing herself to hope for more, never expecting to be seen as something more than just the maid. But now, standing in the life she had never imagined, she couldn't ignore what was growing between them. There was a quiet affection, a deep respect that she couldn't deny, and it was becoming clear that her feelings for Dominic were changing. It was during these moments, when she was lost in thought, that she began to question what it all meant. Was this just a passing phase? Was she letting herself dream too much? Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his usual confident demeanor softened by the gentle look in his eyes. Mind if I join you? He asked, his voice low and calm. Jasmine smiled, her heart skipping a beat at the sound of his voice. Of course, she replied, shifting slightly to make room for him. Dominic stepped into the room, his gaze moving to the window before meeting her eyes. It's peaceful here, he said, taking a seat beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, a quiet understanding between them. But it wasn't long before Dominic broke it. I've been thinking, he said slowly, his voice steady but laced with something deeper. Jasmine turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. About what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her for a long moment, as though considering how to phrase his next words. About us, he said quietly. Jasmine felt her breath catch in her throat. Us? She repeated, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Dominic nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. I know things haven't always been clear between us, but lately, I've realized something, he said, his voice low but filled with meaning. You've changed my life, Jasmine. You've made me realize that there's more to living than just controlling everything, than just managing everything. You've brought something into this house that I didn't even know I needed, peace. Jasmine's heart raced as she listened to his words, her mind struggling to keep up with what he was saying. She had always kept her emotions close, always guarded, but now, hearing him speak like this, it was as if something inside her shifted. She had always known that there was something different about her relationship with Dominic, but to hear him say it out loud made her realize just how much she had come to mean to him. "I don't know how to respond to that," Jasmine whispered, her voice shaking. Dominic smiled softly, the expression in his eyes warm and sincere. "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "I just needed you to know. You've given me more than I ever expected." For a moment, Jasmine felt like the world had stopped spinning. She had never imagined that someone like Dominic, someone so powerful, so used to being in control, could speak to her with such vulnerability. It was a side of him that she hadn't seen before, and it left her breathless. She didn't know what to say. "I never meant to change anything," she said softly, almost to herself. "I just wanted to help. I wanted to do right by Marco." Dominic reached out, his hand brushing gently against hers. "You've done more than that," he said quietly. "You've shown me that it's okay to care again. It's okay to let people in." The weight of his words settled over her, and for the first time in her life, Jasmine allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something more. She had spent so long guarding her heart, so long telling herself that she was just a servant, that she had forgotten what it meant to truly connect with someone. But now, standing in the quiet of the room with Dominic, she realized that she had found something she never thought she would. Something real. Dominic looked at her, his expression softening. "You've become more to me than just someone who works here, Jasmine," he said, his voice low but steady. "You've become someone I care about." Jasmine felt her heart race, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of his words. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was seen, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged.